If I had to make a decision today, my guys, I'm so excited today. We're comparing the 2024 Mazda MX-5 Miata, the new ND3 with improved steering and LSD, against a 2006 Honda S2000. That's the AP2 or AP2.5, because now you have the throttle by wire. And I actually was just considering the S2000 versus the E46. I decided against the E46 after driving a few examples. Both of these actually have double wishbone front suspension, the E46 being McPherson strut. But then I got this recently. I've been driving this the last week. I'm like, shit, the steering is actually substantially improved over the ND2. And now this is back on the table. So today, hopefully I'm gonna have some clarity as to whether I'm getting an S2000, an AP2, or an MX-5 Miata as my new track toy. Let's start with the Miata. We've gone over the updates to this ND3 in the other videos we've done on this. I'm gonna focus on the driving rather than things like the screen being updated or the headlights and the taillights and whatever, and the new wheels. I'm gonna talk mostly about the driving. If you want the other stuff, check out my two other videos covering this new ND3 Mazda Miata. This car is substantially lighter than the S2000. Both are lightweights by modern standards. This one is a Grand Touring with a soft top, coming in around 2,350 pounds roughly. If I were to go MX-5 Miata, I would get the Club, which is the middle tier. There's the Sport, Club, Grand Touring, and still soft top, not RF. Put this onto the track mode. A new thing for 2024, by the way. But again, if I were to get a Mazda MX-5 Miata, I'd get the Club with the Brembo BBS Recaro seat package. Because these seats aren't bad, but the Recaros definitely would be a welcome upgrade on track. Oh, what is up, 8.6? The ND2 and ND3 have the same engine. 2-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder, pushing out 181 horsepower, 150 pound-feet of torque. But in a car of this size and weight, the power-to-weight ratio isn't too far off the S2000, which weighs around 2,800 pounds and has 240 horsepower. In Japan, I was fortunate enough to drive a Honda S660 Modulo X. And that thing, I mean, it was sub 2,000 pounds, Honda transmission, amazing to use. And that reminded me of how much I love and crave the experience of being in a lightweight rear-wheel drive sports car. I mean, that one's mid-engine, a little bit different. I was looking into importing them actually, but you can't import them into the US. Not until 2040 at the earliest. And I feel like the Miata, S2000, Lotus Elise, those are the things here in the US that are gonna give me the closest driving experience to that. Big thing here to know about the ND3 is that the steering is much improved. Woohoo! It's a bit controversial online. People saying, hey, there's no difference. Some reviewers also saying there's no difference. Keep in mind, you want to compare like to like, vehicle with the same tires. Also keep in mind, different people have different sensitivity, right? So if you're like me, you've spent a lot of time in your youth honing your dexterity, working, building models, drawing, sketching, arts, crafts, whatever, building stuff, plastic surgery as an adult, those things make my hands more sensitive, and I notice a very substantial difference between this and the ND2. But if you don't notice the difference, that's not a problem. That's actually great, because you're gonna get the same level of enjoyment between the two vehicles. New asymmetrical LSD that helps increase stability on corner turn-in and gets you less understeer on corner exit. The car is feeling pretty neutral. Woohoo, there we go, a little bit of rotation. But if I'm being honest, I would need to compare it against an ND2 that has an LSD, the older LSD, to comment on how big of an improvement that is. because the ND2 that I just drove earlier today was automatic. The automatics, Mazda is smart. They know that people driving an automatic ND Miata, they don't care about driving dynamics in the same way that someone driving a manual does, so they withhold the LSD. The car is pretty softly sprung, so it takes a moment to get settled into the corner, which is whimsical, it's fun, but it's less like hardcore sports car. You're looking at a GR86 and S2000, much more purpose-built, feels a little bit more intentional, whereas this feels a little bit more whimsical and fun, like a toy. You can obviously change that with the aftermarket, not a big deal. We are keeping the windows up just for your audio pleasure, but with the top down, these things are even more of a riot. Such a all-encompassing, all-engaging, completely consuming experience. Oh man, I love the way this thing drives. Got a little bit of rotation there on corner entry. So while the LSD might be improving that, this is still a short wheelbase light car, and you can get the rear end a little loose on corner entry. But the things that I really appreciate about the Mazda Miata, being a 2024 model, the fact that they're still making this is amazing, right? How light it is. You know, they've gone back to basics. They actually made this lighter than the NC, the generation that came before, which people complain about being a boat, but that one was still also very lightweight. I think it was something like 100 pounds heavier than this, but someone please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. So this one's actually closer to the weight of the original NA Miata, and with that lightweight, everything just comes, everything's better, right? Acceleration, deceleration, handling, turn-in. And Mazda really focused on having great inputs. The steering here being the big thing that improved, but everything else is largely unchanged, and that's fine because the manual transmission is fantastic. One of the best manual transmissions you can buy on the market today. Pedal placement is brilliant, natural. Heel towing is a cinch. Throttle response is immediate and natural. All these things that you care about in a driver-focused vehicle is just so dialed in. And with it being a 2024, you have things like Apple CarPlay and rear cross-traffic alert and blind spot monitoring and just like modern safety, right? If you get in an accident in this, you're better off than in an S2000 because of the I mean, even though this one weighs less than the S2000, the technology in safety and you know, crumple zones and chassis and you know, preventive measures as well, things like the rear cross traffic and blind spot monitoring, all those things are better now. Things like traction control as well, right? The AP2 does have traction control, but it's not going to be as sophisticated as something like this. I'm in the track mode that allows slip. This is also new for 2024, but it'll still intervene and make sure you don't bin it. Some critiques about the MX-5 Miata. The two main things for me, number one, the engine isn't that special. I love that it revs out to 7,500, and the power and torque feel adequate. In fact, this has definitely more torque than the S2000, mid-range. But it doesn't have that same emotionality as the S2000's engine. This is essentially a Mazda 3 engine that they retuned. Gave it a higher redline. That's why you definitely want the ND2 or ND3, not the ND1, because the ND1 is essentially just a Mazda 3 engine that they didn't have the budget to actually improve in the way they wanted to, but they did that for the ND2. Now the second complaint I have about this car is that out of the box, the suspension being too soft. I think I get it, it makes the ride more comfortable, but it does compromise the driving dynamics, and it's harder to get to the limit repeatedly, consistently, corner after corner like you can in an 8.6. That thing, you can just get the tail out corner after corner, very predictable. You know, there's a lot of clarity as to what's happening with the vehicle. With this, there's that delay, so sometimes you're not pushing it hard enough in a corner, sometimes it's too hard, and you have to adjust based on what the car wants to do. I'm sure with time you get a better feeling for the car, but with vehicles like that 8.6, it's just immediately out of the box. You don't have much of a learning curve. You can just bam, corner after corner, get the tail out, hit the limit. This is still a very good beginner's, you know, like a tool to improve your driving skill. Don't get me wrong. The 8.6 has slightly more forgiving handling characteristics, this having a shorter wheelbase and just the way that it's tuned with the suspension. But the lightweight nature, the approachability, the fun factor, you don't even have to be bombing. You can be driving this thing slow with the top down. It's still such a blast to drive. But again, for me, if I were to get this, I'm looking at it through the lens of track toy, track weapon. And I think both Miata and S2000 are totally valid. You're gonna see a lot of Miatas on the track that are keeping up with just about anything in terms of lap time, right? On the straights, sure, you're gonna leave them in the dust. But in the corners, they catch you, and these things can be pretty quick when you prep them properly. And with that, it's time to hop into the 2006 Honda S2000 bone stock, except for intake. And now we're on the S2000. Oh yes, many fond memories with the S2K. Love the driver focused interior. I would personally lose this, but you know, everything is from the TAC, which was inspired by the early 90s McLaren Honda powered Formula One car that of course Ayrton Senna drove. I love that TAC. Some people think it looks corny. I think it's super sick. Even hiding this, right? The CD player, or I guess the aftermarket Alpine head unit right here, hiding that away is really just driver focused. And you have to be the right size here, because the Miata, you got telescope and tilt, and here you don't have the same level of adjustability. So hopefully you're the right size. I mean, I'm 6'1", and I think a lot of people focus too much on their height. I have like 3 inches above my head here, and I had probably 2 inches in the Miata. Part of it is your leg length versus your torso length, right? But the other thing is your adiposity. Like, if you have more cushion for the pushing, if you know what I mean, it's gonna push your whole body up. So keep that in mind. You gotta sit in one of these yourself. It's not just about height, and it's not just about your leg torso ratio either. Oh, so excited to be back behind the wheel of an S2K. I love these, man. I love these so much. And it's amazing that we're talking about this car more than 20 years later. Honda did that good of a job engineering this thing. Much heavier clutch, still good feel though, compared to the ND3. Super tight and short throws to the shifter. Ah, yes. There's the VTEC, baby. Alright, so first impressions, steering here is definitely a big downgrade. This is an early EPS, right? I think this might be the first EPS that Honda used. And I mean, I talk about these 4 factors of steering. So you have the accuracy / slop, right? So the accuracy is actually pretty good. Maybe a little bit of slop in this example. This car has almost 100,000 miles. Things like bushings wearing out and such are going to influence that, the age of the vehicle. You have the weighting, and this is, it's actually right around here, mostly near center. It's pretty light. You have the ratio. They put a slower ratio in the AP2 versus the AP1, which is a faster ratio, which I personally prefer. And then the feedback. And the feedback here is really the thing that holds it back. I think the other 3, they don't make that big of a difference, because, you know, most car companies are gonna get that, you know, mostly right. The accuracy, the ratio, the weighting. It's feedback that really varies a lot car to car. And in this one, it's definitely lacking. But with the correct modifications, as Eric taught me with his S2000, this amazing track build that you can see right up here, You do some changes to the suspension geometry with, well, first of all, spherical bushings, but also maximizing the caster. You can get a lot more feedback through the wheel. It's not totally dead, but it's for a car like this, it is definitely the weak point. Transmission, I mean, nothing wrong with the ND3 transmission, but this thing is just shorter throws, more mechanical, tighter. I mean, you hear that cliche of bolt action rifle, but it's just so fitting. Throttle response, still immediate. This is the AP 2.5 drive-by-wire, but still not really having an issue rev matching. Of course, with the AP2, the F22C engine, we're making more torque, but the red line is lowered from 9,000 to 8,000 because of that increased stroke. The pistons are moving more per rotation. Both of these cars have double wishbone front suspension. Not in VTEC, like right there, that lack of torque, to some people that's a huge nuisance. That is one of the reasons you want to get the AP2 over the AP1, because that torque, you know, the AP2 is still, you know, high-strung engine, but the AP1, you have lower torque. And especially on track, if you're not right in VTEC, you're gonna have some issues. With the AP2, we do have shorter gear ratios, at least in the lower gears. And even though the 8,000 RPM redline isn't quite as emotional and intoxicating as the 9,000, it's still something special. Still very much a special experience. The ride here is a little bit, again, you can tell this is probably original suspension components because it's a little bit crashy and harsh. Owner will probably be doing a refresh of the various suspension components. It is feeling a bit tired. Yeah, see the steering not giving me much about what the front wheels are doing. I want some load up, I want some release, I want some texture, but it's mostly dead. Now this chassis was very stiff by the contemporary standards, 2000, right? But technology has come far since then. And by the way, a little misshift right there. These things are so closely gated. I almost went into 4th rather than the 6th. But if you compare it to modern chassis, it's not quite as stiff. Miata, I felt a little bit more comfortable doing things like trail braking, getting that rear out on corner entry. The S2000, I guess the AP1 more so than the AP2, but they're a little bit sharper vehicles. They're not quite as forgiving. So you're not going to feel quite as comfortable pushing it as hard as something like a Miata, or especially a GR86. Those I think are the easiest to just get to the limit time and time again. Oh, I love when that VTEC kicks in, baby! compare it to the Miata. Drivetrain in this, definitely more special. The engine, the transmission, best in class. If you want a Japanese roadster, I mean, this is the best engine transmission combo you're gonna get. And shifting this transmission is just such a joy. It is, amongst all the vehicles I've driven, S2000s, in my opinion, have the best manual transmissions, even better than many, many Porsches. Now, the Miata, being newer, has, you know, more creature comforts, things like CarPlay, better NVH isolation, better safety, right? If you get into an accident, I'd rather be in a Miata than this. I think this only has 2 airbags, if I'm not mistaken. The steering in the Miata is also far superior to this. But then you have to keep in mind, what are your biases and what's your use case? So if you're biased to engines and transmissions, then obviously this is the car for you. If you're biased to just steering, then that's the car for you. I love steering, but do I love the steering enough to overcome the things I love about this car? I'm not so sure. I was hoping that this review would give me a lot of clarity as to what I'm gonna get, but if anything, I'm still uncertain because both of these are great. Now, I need to remind myself that the suspension in this is quite tired, so it is a bit crashy. It is much more planted than the Miata. That thing is all loosey-goosey, roly-poly. But again, I'm going to be putting aftermarket coilovers into either car I get, since I'm going to be making these track toys. Woohoo, there we go. Getting the tail a little bit playful. To make a decision today, I'd be leaning S2000 because to me it is a more emotional and exciting experience. I think the Miata is the more logical thing to do. It's newer, warranty, price point. I mean, to get a clean S2000 versus that Mazda Miata, you know, you're not saving that much more by getting the S2000. The price of these used for the mileage, it's really high from what they are from an objective perspective. But the reason is that we just love these cars so much. Peak Honda, the NA1 NSX, and this to me are peak Honda. I mean, I love the S660 as well. I want to drive some of the older, like the S500 and whatnot from way back. But the engine, the transmission, the rawness, and you know, when you put the top down too, I remember the first time I drove an S2000 in San Diego. It's this video right up here. And I was like having a religious experience. It was something else. And the Miata I love, but it's like, my brain says it's the right thing to do. It has this great steering now versus the ND2. It has the better safety, it's lighter, and, you know, it still has double wishbone for, like, the logical side of my brain is telling me the Miata's the great option. It has the warranty, yada yada yada. But my heart, the emotional side, is like, yo, S2K all the way. AP2, track prep this bad boy. You know, like, I want to go all out with it too. I want to tow it to the racetrack. I want it to be as hardcore as possible. Not going to really be dailing this. I'm going to have my Amira as my weekend sports car, my S2000 as my track toy, and I will have to get rid of the CX-50, which I love right now as my daily, but I will need to tow this, and the CX-50 is not going to be able to tow this vehicle, obviously. I'll probably go AP2, 2004, 2005, rather than this AP 2.5. I do like the cable throttle. Getting some little inconsistency with the throttle here and there. And I feel like more immediacy and predictability with the cable throttle from my experiences. God, this transmission is so good. I just want to keep shifting it. So good. I don't think you can go wrong either way. They're both such incredible vehicles. Kudos to Mazda for making this, right? And thanks to CardinaleWay Mazda for loaning me this vehicle to review, the new ND3 Miata. Go follow them on Instagram at Mazda Las Vegas. And man, I mean, either way, both are such special vehicles. By the way, you don't want to actually turn the engine off from here. You want to do it that way. Otherwise, you get some problems. But damn, both are such special vehicles. A little bit lighter, a little bit newer, well, a lot newer, but a little bit safer, and the creature comforts, all that stuff, the warranty. This one though, this speaks to the heart, man. Honda S2000, AP2, there is no replacement. 20 years later, 2 decades plus, we're still talking about it because it is such fucking money. Peak Honda engineering. My friends, let me know what you think. Do you agree, disagree? S2K, Miata, what should I get for my track toy? Much love, my friends. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you all in the next one.